Dart School presents Compound Interest 1. Recall from previous video that in simple interest, the interest is always calculated on the initial amount of money invested. In real life though, the concept of compound interest is of more significance. In compound interest, the interest is calculated on the new amount after the previous interest has been added to the previous initial amount. In other words, interest is calculated on the initial amount as well as on the interest accumulated. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you invest 100 Rand at 10% annual interest for a period of 3 years. And let's say this is a simple interest rate. So this is simple interest. Therefore, the future amount is going to be equal to 100 times 1 plus 10% as a decimal is 0.1 times 3, which is equal to 130 Rand. 0.1 times 3 is 0.3. Add 1, you get 1.3. 1.3 times 100 is 130. I just did that all in one single step. Now, if the same money is deposited at the same rate for the same time period, but this time the rate of interest is compounded, it would mean that at the end of the first year, the future amount, let me just write that as A, is equal to 100 times 1 plus 10% is 0.1. So this is going to be 110 Rand. Now when we want to find out the amount at the end of the second year, this is no longer going to be 110 because we calculate it based on the amount for the previous year. The new amount is the previous interest plus it's being added, the previous interest has been added to the initial amount. So this is going to be 110 times 1 plus 0.1, which is going to be 121 this time. And at the end of the third year, the new amount or the final amount is equal to 121 times 1 plus 0.1. So each time the interest is being calculated on a new amount. It's 100 to begin with. The final amount at the end of the first year becomes the initial amount for the beginning of the second year. And the final amount for the second year becomes the initial amount for the third year, and so on. So this is going to be equal to 133.1 Rand. Now if you compare this and this is the final amount of the future amount under simple interest, the same rate of interest, the same initial investment, the same time period, and this is the amount for the compound interest. This is always going to be more after the first year, because after the first year the interest is calculated on the initial amount as well as on the interest. Let's try and get that in one single step. The amount after a certain number of years, we are going to keep that open, we are going to say that's n number of years, is going to be the initial amount, call that P, times 1 plus I over 100 is the amount at the end of the first period. Now all of this becomes the initial amount for the second year. So therefore, to find the amount at the end of the second year, this must be multiplied again with 1 plus I over 100. That's for 2 years. And this becomes the amount at the end of the second year. That becomes the initial amount for the third year, which needs to be multiplied with 1 plus I over 100 again. And you keep doing that n number of times. Therefore, the generalized formula for the amount is equal to the initial amount times 1 plus I over 100, if I is given as a percentage, raised to the nth power, because we are going to have 1 plus 1 over 100 n number of times in the multiplication sentence. Let's do a couple of problems now. Mrs. Baker has 3,000 Rand and she wants to save that money for a family vacation due in 6 years. She invests her money at a rate of 5% per annum, that means 5% per year, compounded annually. How much will Mrs. Baker be able to spend on her family vacation? We need to find the final amount that she has got with her to be able to spend on her vacation with the family. The final amount is going to be equal to the initial amount, that's the compound interest formula, 3,000 times 1 plus the rate is given as a 5%, so we need to do 5 over 100 and raise that to the number of time periods. In this case, it's 6 years. So this is going to be equal to 3,000 times 1 plus 5 over 100 is 0.05, 1 plus 0.05 is 1.05 raised to the 6th power, which is equal to 3,000 times 1.34, which is equal to 4,020.29 Rand. Let's try another one. The compound interest calculated yearly on a certain sum of money, it's not given, for the second year is 800 Rand and for the third year is 864 Rand. Calculate the rate, so we need to find the rate of interest and the initial amount of money. So that certain sum of money needs to be found out, as well as the rate of interest. The compound interest for the second year is equal to 800, it's given. And the compound interest for the third year is 864, so that's 864 Rand. Now if you take the difference between these two, that's 64 Rand. That means there has been more interest in the third year. Now where is this extra interest of 64 Rand coming from? That actually is the interest on the interest earned on the second year. Therefore, this is the interest on the interest, which is 800 Rand for the second year. If that makes sense, the rate of interest is equal to 64 over 800. 64 Rand is the interest earned over this 800 Rand, which happens to be the interest for the second year. So that's the additional interest earned for the third year. If no additional interest were to be earned for the third year, then it would still be 800. It won't be 864. Now if you go on to do this for the fourth year, the interest for the fourth year would be even more than 64, even more than 864 actually. That's how the money grows. So the rate of interest is 64, the extra amount earned, over the interest in the previous year times 100, which is 8%. So this is 8%, we got that. We need to find the initial amount of money invested, so let's call that P. Now initially it was P. After 1 year, let's say it turned to P1, obviously after you added the interest to P. And then after 2 years, this is after 2 years, this has got to a new value. Let's call that P2 for the time being. And then after 3 years, it's got to another new value, that's P3. That's after 3 years. Now let's think about the relationship between P1 and P2, given that the rate of interest is 8%. So if you start with P1 and apply a rate of interest of 8%, essentially what you're doing is, on the second year, you're doing a P1 times 1 plus 0.08. to get P2, the amount at the end of the second year is equal to the initial amount times 1 plus the rate of interest. So that's going to be equal to, so P2, that is going to be equal to 1.08 P1. So this is nothing but P2, 1.08 P1. If you subtract P1 from that, you get 0.08 P1. And that is nothing but the interest earned over that 1 year from the second year to the third year. So that's the interest. And it's given that that part of the interest for the second year is 800 Rand. So this is going to be equal to 800. That lets us find this P1, the amount after the first year. So if you divide this with 0.08 and divide this with 0.08, you get P1. P1 is nothing but 10,000 Rand. If you apply an interest of 8% on 10,000, you get an interest of 800 Rand, right? And now, in the same way, we could go ahead and say the relationship between P and P1 is like P multiplied with 1.08 is equal to P1, which is 10,000 Rand. We know it by now. So P, the initial amount deposited or invested, is equal to 10,000 divided with 1.08, which is equal to 9,259.26 Rand. So this is P, 9,259.26 Rand. So we got the rate of interest, we got the initial amount.